This is my third time filming. If I come out looking like an untoasted piece of bread again, I'm going to lose it. Hello everyone, welcome back. If you're new, an introduction is in order. It's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Kristeau. Consider subscribing if you like psychology, paranormal, or supernatural videos. This video will be me delving into psychological defense mechanisms. Essentially, I'm first going to be giving you a brief overview on what defense mechanisms are. So like a mini intro, the levels of defense we go through, as well as the defense mechanisms associated with each level. And then finally, I'm going to be taking 5 of the most common defense mechanisms and explaining them in detail. All links to the sources of information that I used will be posted in the description box below, along with timestamps for the defense mechanisms that I'll be talking about towards the end. I know that some of you are curious and want to do research on your own, so those links are for you. We begin in 3, 2, 1, let's go. So in order to proceed, you first need to understand the concept of the ego. This is because defense mechanisms are made to protect the ego. The ego is the view a person has of themselves. So if someone says, hey, that person has a big ego, the person being referenced thinks highly of themselves. They believe their worth is big, thus big ego. Great, so that's out of the way. Now, what are defense mechanisms? Defense mechanisms are unconscious methods of coping used by an individual to help deal with situations that cause a person stress or anxiety. It is also used to combat guilt from doing something that we knew was wrong. While it's natural to have such mechanisms, the overuse of them can lead to a lot of problems in a person's life. Like I mentioned earlier, defense mechanisms are used to preserve a person's self-esteem, aka ego, should it feel threatened by external or internal forces. Defense mechanisms can falsify or distort the reality for the person implementing them. Now on to the levels of defense mechanisms. American psychiatrist George Vaillant studied defense mechanisms and categorized them into 4 levels: pathological, immature, neurotic, and mature. First we have level 1, pathological mechanisms. Some defense mechanisms grouped under this level include distortion, delusional projections, and denial. When these mechanisms are used excessively, the root cause is almost always a pathological disorder, meaning that the person was born with a condition that makes them hallucinate or distort reality. These defense mechanisms are used to make the person feel as though they do not need to face reality. Those deemed as pathological users of these mechanisms often appear insane to others. So, a typical Alice in Wonderland sort of thing. It's important to note though that in childhood, the use or unwanted experiencing of such mechanisms, like hallucinations, so for example, "Mom, there's a monster under my bed," is normal. In healthy adults, we experience distortion and projections in our dreams. Next is level 2, immature mechanisms. Some defense mechanisms grouped under this level include regression, behaving in a way one did earlier in life, passive-aggressive behavior, and acting out, like yelling at other people. They are used to counteract the discomfort people feel when faced with an uncomfortable situation. It's common to see young children and adolescents use these. However, they can also be seen in adults. And although they're seen in adults, when adults decide to use these mechanisms, they are viewed as immature and difficult to deal with. It's important to note that the use of these defense mechanisms from this level, after adolescence, is certain to cause problems coping with situations as an adult. For example, if you cried as a child to avoid confrontation, and as an adult cried every time you were confronted, not only can you not problem solve, but you can't take criticism, among other things. Now on to level 3, neurotic mechanisms. A few defense mechanisms grouped under this level include displacement, putting emotions from one situation onto another, rationalization, rationalizing bad behavior, and intellectualization, neutralizing strong emotions. It's common to see these in adolescents, but especially in adults. And while these mechanisms prove to be advantageous in the short term, since you can literally run away from your problem, it's usually detrimental long term, as it affects your relationships and even if you're able to be happy in life. If you keep running away from your problems, they're only going to get bigger. Finally, on to level 4, mature mechanisms. Some defense mechanisms grouped under this level include altruism, helping others, sublimation, the rechanneling of emotions, and humor. These mechanisms are often found in what are considered emotionally healthy adults, and even though they are considered mature ways of coping, they originated from immature stages in one's development. The use of any of these defense mechanisms are a conscious adaptation we have made in order to help succeed in life, as well as help manage strong and conflicting emotions. Usually, when people use these methods, they're seen as good-natured or virtuous. However, like all things, if a person overuses even mature mechanisms, they might allow themselves to get trampled on by others or have their self-esteem destroyed. Now, you should have a pretty good understanding of defense mechanisms, as well as their levels. The older you are, the higher the level is that you're most likely operating under. I'm sorry, I just have to stop to say, why do I look so dead? Anyways, it's time for what you've all been waiting for, an in-depth analysis of 5 common mechanisms. The first is denial. Almost everyone uses this. Did you do this?
No.
It's so easy to deny something. Denial, like I mentioned, is grouped under level 1's pathological mechanisms, as it's quite an immature response to use when dealing with a situation. When you use denial, you're simply refusing to acknowledge the reality of a situation that makes you uncomfortable. A fun fact, pathological liars use denial as their main choice of weapon when dealing with conflict. A good example of denial is a psychiatric patient telling a psychiatrist, "I don't need to see you, there's nothing wrong with me." Another example is denying that you're addicted to alcohol and instead insisting that you're only a social drinker. This is by far the easiest mechanism to use to protect your ego, because if you refuse to acknowledge your own behavior, especially if it's toxic, you won't have to change the behavior. Number 2 is displacement. Displacement is when you transfer your original emotions towards someone, like your boss, onto a helpless victim because you know hurting them won't get you in trouble. Have you ever gotten in a fight with someone and then just get mad and just explode on someone else? That's exactly what I'm talking about. That is displacement. Displacement is grouped under neurotic mechanisms. Essentially, this mechanism is like passing down the pain. It's usually a hierarchical abuse situation. Someone with more power decides to hurt you, so you in turn decide to hurt someone else who you perceive is lower than you on the hierarchy. Displacement can be very problematic because domestic abuse can be linked to an excessive use of displacement on the abuser's part. They come home and yell or beat their partners, or children if they have any, to take out their frustration. Maybe that frustration is from work or just from a literal irrelevant situation that is ticking them off. Displacement is a very toxic mechanism to use in my opinion, and if you notice that you use this, please make a conscious effort to change your behavior. Third is repression. It's considered a step up from denial because instead of acknowledging deep down, you unconsciously just forget about it entirely. An example is forgetting about the abuse you faced when you were a child. Another example that's less extreme is forgetting the dentist appointment you had to fill your cavity, so you reschedule it to a later date. While initially this defense mechanism is useful, if whatever repressed is not faced, it might suddenly come to bite you in the butt later on. Fourth is regression. Regression is reverting back into a childlike state, an earlier developmental stage, to have your safety needs met, as the current developmental stage that causes a situation to arise is too stressful for you. An immaculate example of regression is the road rage from many drivers during traffic. Immaculate! Earlier on in life, throwing tantrums may have gotten these people what they wanted. I know my mother would have smacked me. Just kidding, hi mom. So they unconsciously revert back to yelling and screaming, thinking it might get traffic moving, when in actuality, it's absurd. Just because you yell doesn't mean traffic is going to go faster. An extreme disadvantage of using this defense mechanism is that it's highly self-destructive. People will view you as a mature individual just based on how you look. So, if you act in a way that displays your childish side negatively, people will not want to associate with you. Fifth and final is sublimation. It's considered a mature defense mechanism. It is the rechanneling of negative emotions and instincts into something positive. This defense mechanism is unique, as it's one that develops over a long period of time. An example of this is a person with urges to inflict harm on others becoming a surgeon. That way, they can slice and dice like it's Fruit Ninja, but in a way that it's considered completely acceptable to society. I know that one sounds a little crazy, but trust me, it's beneficial to both parties, both society and the person. And that's a wrap. In the comment section below, don't forget to leave your thoughts. I'd love to hear them. Are you aware of using one or more of these defense mechanisms? Or perhaps you know someone that does very blatantly? I used to use displacement a lot. I'd take my anger out on my poor twin brother, Rip Kyle. But I have learned to control it because I was like, that's not nice. He's my brethren. I should not do that. Now I've been working on using sublimation. Instead of being violent, I think of violent memes. I don't know. It works for me. Maybe it'll work for you. Just think of like violent Perry the Platypus memes. As always, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to see more videos like these. I'll see you next time. Bye!